A billionaire has everything, except the one thing that actually matters. When he discovers a homeless girl secretly feeding his guard dog, he doesn't call security or press charges. Instead, he does something nobody saw coming. Something that will completely shatter the cold, isolated world he's built around himself. This is the story of how one act of kindness from the most unlikely person became the catalyst that transformed a man who had lost his humanity. Stay tuned, because what happens next will change everything. Maxwell Harrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, overlooking a city that bowed to his name. Billions in the bank. A tech empire that had reshaped entire industries. Power that most people could only dream about. Influence that stretched across continents. But as he stared out at the glittering skyline below, watching the tiny figures of ordinary people living their ordinary lives, there was something hollow in his gaze. Something profoundly empty that no amount of money could ever fill. His mansion wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. Security cameras mounted on every corner, every angle, capturing everything. Armed guards stationed at every gate, every entrance, trained to question everyone. Walls so impossibly high that the outside world felt like a distant memory, a life he'd left behind long ago. He'd built this empire brick by brick, deal by deal, sacrifice by sacrifice. Each step up the ladder had cost him something. And somewhere along the way, sometime between his first million and his 100th, he'd sacrificed the last thing that made him human. Genuine connection. The loneliness was suffocating, though he'd never admit it to anyone. His phone rang constantly with business calls, but no one ever called just to talk. His calendar was packed with meetings, but not a single lunch with a friend. His penthouse was filled with expensive art and furniture, but it echoed with silence. He'd won the game of wealth, but he'd lost the game of life. The only living being that didn't fear him, didn't want something from him, didn't have an agenda, was Rex. His German shepherd, loyal beyond measure, unconditional in his affection. The only companion Maxwell had left in this world. But then came the footage that would change everything. One night, while reviewing security tapes out of habit, a ritual he performed almost every evening just to feel some sense of control, Maxwell froze. His hand hovered over the keyboard. There, on the grainy black and white screen, was an intruder. A small figure, moving carefully through the darkness, approaching Rex at the edge of the property. Maxwell's jaw clenched. His hand moved instinctively toward the phone to call security, to have this person arrested for trespassing. But something stopped him. Something he couldn't quite explain made him pause and watch instead. The figure knelt down beside Rex with surprising gentleness, moving slowly so as not to startle him. Maxwell leaned closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing. He expected theft. He expected trouble. But what happened next shattered every cynical assumption he'd built his worldview upon. Instead of attacking or stealing or causing any harm, the figure did something Maxwell hadn't witnessed in years. They showed genuine, authentic kindness. A small hand reached out into the darkness, offering food to his dog. Gentle, tender, real. There was no ulterior motive, no hidden agenda. Just pure compassion from a complete stranger. Maxwell sat back in his chair, stunned. He rewound the footage and watched it again, and again, and again. Each time the same scene unfolded, this mysterious figure, this intruder, risking who knows what just to make sure his dog was fed and cared for. Who was this person? Why would they risk trespassing on the property of one of the most powerful men in the world just to feed a dog? The questions consumed him. gnawing at something deep inside his chest that he thought he'd buried long ago. What he didn't know was that this single moment of witnessing genuine compassion, raw, unfiltered, and completely selfless, would begin to crack the impenetrable walls he'd spent a lifetime constructing around his heart. The next evening, Maxwell found himself doing something he hadn't done in years: waiting. He sat in the darkened security room, multiple monitors glowing before him, all focused on the same section of his property where the mysterious figure had appeared the night before. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, forgotten on the edge of his expensive mahogany desk. His business emails sat unanswered in his inbox, dozens of them marked urgent, demanding his attention. For the first time in decades, work didn't matter. The empire he'd spent his entire life building suddenly felt insignificant. Only this did. Only the mystery of this stranger mattered. He'd canceled 3 meetings, ignored calls from his board of directors, told his assistant he didn't want to be disturbed for any reason. The staff had exchanged worried glances. Maxwell Harrington never canceled meetings. Maxwell Harrington never ignored calls. But tonight, he was a man possessed by something he couldn't quite understand or explain. At 11:47 p.m., she appeared. Maxwell's breath caught in his throat. The figure on the screen was unmistakably a girl. Young, impossibly young. She moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to navigate the world quietly, unseen, as if invisibility was a survival skill she'd perfected. Her clothes were worn, layered despite the mild weather, and her backpack looked like it had seen better days, patched in places, held together with duct tape and determination. But what struck Maxwell most profoundly was the way she approached Rex, with such tenderness, such genuine care, as if this dog was the most important thing in her world, as if he was worth more than anything else she possessed. His guard dog, usually alert and defensive with strangers, seemed to recognize something in her. His tail wagged slowly, cautiously, as if he too understood that this was someone special, someone safe. He watched as she pulled out a container of food, homemade by the looks of it, prepared with obvious care, and carefully portioned it into Rex's bowl with meticulous attention. She spoke to the dog in soft whispers, words he couldn't quite make out through the security feed's grainy audio. But her tone was unmistakable. Love. Pure, unconditional love. The kind of love that asked for nothing in return, that expected nothing but gave everything. Maxwell felt something shift inside his chest, something he couldn't name, something he'd thought was dead and buried long ago beneath years of business deals and corporate takeovers. His hand trembled slightly as he watched this girl, this stranger, show more genuine affection to his dog than anyone had ever shown to him. The realization was both terrifying and oddly liberating. Before he could think it through, before his rational mind could talk him out of it with logic and reason, before his lawyers could advise him against it, he made a decision. He stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward and hitting the wall with a soft thud. He grabbed a jacket from the back of his office door, a designer piece that cost more than most people's monthly salary, and walked out into the night. His security team would have questions. His staff would think he'd lost his mind. The board would demand explanations. But for once, Maxwell Harrington didn't care what anyone thought. He took the private elevator down to the ground floor, then walked through the corridors of his mansion, past priceless paintings and sculptures that had cost millions, past rooms he rarely entered because they felt too empty, too cold. His footsteps echoed in the silence, the only sound in a house that had never felt like a home. He found her near the gate, still feeding Rex, completely unaware of his presence. Up close, she was even younger than he'd thought. Couldn't be more than 12 or 13. though her eyes carried the weight of someone much older. Her face was thin, almost gaunt, with the kind of thinness that comes from missing meals, from choosing to go hungry so others could eat. There were dirt smudges on her cheeks, and her fingernails were broken and dirty. But when she smiled at Rex, when she smiled at Rex, that weight lifted from her features, and he saw something pure, something untouched by the cruelty of the world, at least for this moment. "You're trespassing," Maxwell said, his voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. The girl's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. Her entire body went rigid. She scrambled backward, ready to run, her survival instincts kicking in immediately. Her hand instinctively went to her backpack, as if to protect it, as if it contained something precious and irreplaceable. Maxwell could see the panic in her face, the way her entire body tensed for flight, preparing to bolt into the darkness and disappear into the night. But something made him hold up his hands, palms open in a gesture of surrender. "Wait," he said, and his voice, usually so commanding, so cold, so accustomed to giving orders that people obeyed without question, came out softer than he'd ever heard it. There was something almost vulnerable in his tone. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to call anyone. I promise." The girl hesitated, still poised to run, her muscles coiled like springs ready to release. Her eyes darted between him and the gate, calculating distances and escape routes with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd had to run before. I was just feeding your dog. He looked hungry, and I know," Maxwell interrupted gently, taking a step closer, but not too close, giving her space, respecting her fear. "I saw, on the cameras." Her face went pale. She'd been caught, exposed, discovered. Maxwell could see the calculation in her eyes, whether to run, whether to beg, whether to explain, whether to lie. But instead, she stood her ground, her chin lifted slightly despite the fear in her eyes. There was a defiance there, a pride that hadn't been beaten out of her despite whatever circumstances had led her to this point. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, the words tumbling out. "I'll leave. I won't come back. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. Lily," Maxwell interrupted gently, and the girl's eyes widened in surprise. "What's your name?" "Lily," she answered quietly, still ready to bolt at any moment, still not trusting that this powerful man wouldn't hurt her or turn her over to the authorities. Her voice was so soft, he almost couldn't hear it. "Lily," Maxwell repeated, testing the name on his tongue. It suited her somehow. Delicate, yet resilient. Beautiful, yet fragile. "I'm Maxwell, and you're not in trouble." She didn't look convinced. No one had ever shown her kindness without expecting something in return. He could see it in the way she held herself. Defensive and guarded, the way her eyes darted between him and the gate. Always calculating escape routes, always preparing for betrayal. It was the posture of someone who'd learned that the world wasn't kind, that people were inherently selfish, that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. "How long have you been feeding Rex?" Maxwell asked, sitting down slowly on the stone bench near the gate. The casual gesture seemed to confuse her, but it also seemed to calm her slightly. He was lowering himself, making himself less threatening, showing vulnerability. It was a calculated move, but it was also genuine. "A few weeks," Lily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she was afraid that speaking too loudly would shatter whatever fragile peace had formed between them. "I was sleeping in the park across the street, and I heard him crying. He sounded so sad and lonely. So I started bringing him food from wherever I could find it. A few weeks." She'd been trespassing on his property for weeks, risking arrest, risking violence, and his security team had only caught it on footage last night. That meant she was smart, careful, resourceful. She'd managed to evade the most advanced security system money could buy. "Where do you sleep now?" Maxwell asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lily's silence was answer enough. She slept outside, in parks, in alleys, in abandoned buildings, wherever she could find shelter from the elements and safety from predators. Maxwell felt something crack open inside him, something he'd kept sealed for so long he'd forgotten it was there. This child, homeless and alone, vulnerable and afraid, had shown more genuine compassion to a stranger's dog than anyone in his entire empire had ever shown to him. His board members, his business associates, his so-called friends, they'd all shown him respect born of fear, interest born of greed. But this girl, this stranger, had shown him something real. "You can keep coming," he said finally, his voice steady and sure, "to feed Rex. But on one condition." Lily's eyes widened with suspicion. She'd learned that conditions always came with a price, that nothing in life was free. "What condition?" "You tell me about yourself, and you let me help you." She looked at him with deep suspicion, the wariness of someone who'd learned that the world wasn't kind, that help always came with a price, that people with power used it to exploit those without. But as she looked at Rex, who was nuzzling against her leg with obvious affection, something in her expression softened. The dog's unconditional acceptance seemed to give her courage. "Okay," she whispered finally, the word barely audible in the darkness. And with that single word, Maxwell Harrington's carefully constructed world began to crumble. He just didn't know it yet. He didn't understand that this moment would become the turning point of his life, the moment when everything changed, when the walls he'd spent decades building would begin to collapse, brick by brick, until he was left standing naked and vulnerable before someone who would see him for who he really was. Not a billionaire, not an empire builder, but simply a man who'd been lonely for far too long. Maxwell led Lily inside the mansion, watching as her eyes grew wider with each step. She'd never seen anything like it before. The soaring ceilings that stretched up 3 stories high, the crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen waterfalls and cast dancing shadows across marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. The paintings that hung on walls like windows into other worlds, each one worth more than she'd ever earn in a lifetime. She moved slowly, carefully, as if afraid that touching anything might break it. Or worse, that she might contaminate this pristine world with her presence, leaving fingerprints of poverty on surfaces meant only for the wealthy. Her bare feet made soft sounds against the cold marble as Maxwell guided her through corridors lined with sculptures and art installations. She caught her reflection in a massive mirror and flinched at what she saw. A thin, dirty girl who didn't belong in a place like this. Her clothes hung loose on her frame, and her hair, which hadn't been properly washed in weeks, hung limp and matted around her shoulders. "Come," Maxwell said gently, his hand hovering near her shoulder but not quite touching. Respecting her space, understanding instinctively that she needed to maintain control over her own body. "You look like you could use something to eat." He guided her toward the kitchen, which was larger than most apartments. Stainless steel appliances gleamed under recessed lighting. The countertops were polished granite. The refrigerator alone looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. Lily stood in the center of the room, looking completely out of place, like a sparrow that had somehow wandered into a palace. Lily's stomach growled audibly, betraying her, and she wrapped her arms around herself defensively. She looked embarrassed, her cheeks flushing a deep red. I'm okay. I don't want to be any trouble. I shouldn't have come inside. I should probably go. But Maxwell was already moving, already opening the refrigerator with the confidence of someone accustomed to abundance. He pulled out ingredients with practiced efficiency. Chicken breasts, fresh vegetables, rice, herbs. He'd spent so many years having others cook for him, having meals prepared by private chefs who anticipated his every culinary desire, that he'd almost forgotten how to do it himself. Almost. But there was something about this moment that made him want to do it personally, to show Lily that he cared through action, not just words, not just empty promises that meant nothing. "When's the last time you had a real meal?" he asked, not looking at her directly, sensing that direct eye contact might make her more uncomfortable, might feel too intense, too invasive. He began pulling out a cutting board and knife, moving with surprising dexterity for a man who rarely entered his own kitchen. Lily didn't answer immediately. She sat at the kitchen island, her backpack clutched to her chest like a security blanket, like a lifeline to her old life. Her knuckles were white from gripping it so tightly. A few days ago, maybe. There's a shelter that serves dinner on Thursdays. And sometimes people leave food in the park. Mostly it's stale bread or leftovers, but it's something. A few days. Maxwell felt his jaw clench, felt anger rise in his chest, not at Lily, but at a world that allowed children to go hungry, at a system that failed its most vulnerable members, at himself for having been so blind to suffering that existed just outside his gilded walls. He worked in silence, preparing a simple meal. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, rice with herbs. Nothing too heavy. Nothing that might upset her stomach after days of inadequate nutrition. He'd read somewhere that you had to be careful reintroducing food to malnourished people. As he cooked, he became aware of Lily watching him, studying him with intelligent eyes, trying to understand his motives, trying to figure out what he wanted from her. The kitchen filled with the aroma of cooking food, and he heard Lily's stomach growl again. She looked down at the counter, embarrassed. "Why are you doing this?" she asked finally, her voice small and uncertain, trembling slightly with emotion she was trying to contain. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I'm nobody." Maxwell paused, his hands stilling over the cutting board. It was a fair question, perhaps the most important question she could ask. Why was he doing this? A week ago, he would have called security and had her arrested without a second thought. A week ago, he wouldn't have hesitated. He would have viewed her as a threat, as a problem to be solved. But something had shifted in him, something fundamental and irreversible, something that had cracked open the moment he saw her feeding his dog with such tenderness. "Because no one should be hungry," he said simply, his voice carrying a weight of conviction that surprised even him. "And because you showed my dog more kindness than most people have ever shown me. In all my years, with all my money, with all my power, no one has ever treated me with the kind of genuine compassion you showed to a stranger's dog. That tells me something important about who you are." He plated the food carefully, arranging it with an artist's eye, and set it in front of her. Lily stared at it for a long moment, as if afraid it might disappear, as if this was some kind of trick, some kind of test she didn't understand. The plate held more food than she typically ate in a week. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the fork. Then, slowly, she began to eat. She ate slowly at first, with restraint, as if she'd learned to control her hunger through practice and necessity. Then faster, then with a kind of desperate hunger that came from genuine deprivation, from bodies that had learned to survive on less than they needed. Maxwell looked away, giving her privacy and her vulnerability, understanding that being watched while eating might make her feel ashamed. "Tell me about yourself," he said, pouring 2 glasses of water from the pitcher on the counter. "Where are you from? What's your story?" Lily finished chewing before she answered, swallowing carefully. "I'm from about 50 miles north of here, small town called Riverside. You probably wouldn't know it. It's not the kind of place that matters to people like you." "Try me," Maxwell said, sitting across from her on one of the high stools. "I want to know." She took a long drink of water before, continuing, gathering her courage, preparing herself to share parts of her life that she'd kept hidden. "My mom, she had problems. Addiction. Heroin, mostly. She loved me, I think, but the drugs were stronger than the love. My dad left when I was 5. I don't really remember him. There are a few fuzzy memories, the smell of his cologne, the sound of his laugh. But mostly I just remember my mom crying after he left." Her voice was matter-of-fact, as if she'd told this story many times, as if the pain had been dulled by repetition, worn smooth like a stone in a river. But Maxwell could see the way her hands clenched, the way her eyes looked away, betraying the emotion she was trying to contain. "When I was 10, my mom got really sick. She was in the hospital for a long time, 3 months, I think, though it felt longer. I stayed with my aunt, but she had 3 kids of her own and not much money. We were all crowded into a small house, and I could feel like I was a burden, you know, like I was taking resources away from her own children." Lily paused, pushing food around her plate with her fork. "When my mom got out, she promised things would be different. She went to rehab. She got a job. For about 6 months, things were actually good. We had a small apartment. She was sober. I thought we were going to be okay." Maxwell listened intently, not interrupting, not offering platitudes or empty sympathy. He simply listened, which was perhaps the greatest gift he could give her. He understood in that moment that listening, truly listening, was something Lily had probably never experienced before. "But then she relapsed," Lily continued, her voice becoming quieter, more strained. "It happened gradually at first. She'd miss work. She'd come home late. Then one day she just stopped trying. She stopped going to work. She stopped paying the rent. We got evicted. We lived in our car for a while and then in shelters. And then she trailed off, her body tensing, her eyes looking away toward the window, toward something in the distance that only she could see." Maxwell understood without her needing to say more. His hands clenched into fists under the table. But he kept his voice calm, kept his expression neutral, not wanting to add his own pain to hers. "You were there when it happened." "I was with her when she overdosed," Lily confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder might shatter something fragile inside her. "It was a Tuesday night. We were in a motel room that my social worker had helped us get into. She told me to go to sleep, and I did. But then I woke up and something felt wrong. I could feel it in the air, you know, like the world had shifted." She paused, swallowing hard. "I found her on the bathroom floor. I called 911, but it was too late. She was already gone. The paramedics said she'd probably been dead for hours." Maxwell reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. He said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't sound hollow and inadequate. "After that, I went into foster care. Lily continued, her voice becoming stronger, as if talking about the present was easier than dwelling on the past. The state tried to find me a good home, but there aren't enough good homes for all the kids who need them. I was placed with a family in the city. The Hendersons, they called themselves. They had a big house and seemed nice at first. But the man there, She trailed off again, her body going rigid, her eyes filling with tears that she blinked back furiously. He had expectations about what I owed them for taking me in, about what I should do to earn my keep. Maxwell's entire body went cold. He understood immediately what she was saying, what she wasn't saying, what she was trying to communicate through the gaps in her words. "How long?" he asked quietly, his voice tight with controlled rage. 3 months, Lily whispered. 3 months before I got up the courage to run. I took what little I had and I left. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just ran. "You did the right thing," Maxwell said firmly, squeezing her hand gently. "You were brave. You survived. That took incredible strength." "I've been on the streets since then," Lily continued, seeming to need to get the whole story out now that she'd started. "About 6 months. I'm careful. I know how to stay safe. I stay in public places during the day. I avoid certain areas. I don't trust anyone. I've learned to read people, to figure out who's dangerous and who's just indifferent." She looked at him then, and her eyes held a wisdom that no child should possess, a knowledge of the world's darkness that should never have been necessary for her to learn. "Until now, I guess. I trusted you." "Why now?" Maxwell asked. "Why trust me? You had every reason not to." "Because of Rex," Lily said simply, as if it was obvious. "He's a guard dog, right? He's supposed to be dangerous, supposed to protect you from threats. But he's not. He's just lonely. And you? You could have hurt me or called the police, but you didn't. You asked my name. You listened. You looked at me like I was a person, not a problem. That's more than most people do." Maxwell felt something shift in his chest, felt tears prickling at his eyes, something that hadn't happened in years. This child, who had every reason to distrust the world, who had been betrayed and abandoned and abused by the very people who were supposed to protect her, had placed her faith in him based on the simple observation that he'd treated her with basic human decency. It was both humbling and terrifying. "You're not going back on the streets?" he said quietly but firmly, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "Not tonight. Not ever, if I have anything to say about it." Lily's eyes widened, hope and fear warring in her expression. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're going to stay here," Maxwell said, the words coming out with surprising certainty, as if he'd known all along that this was what he wanted, what he needed. "You're going to eat regular meals. You're going to sleep in a warm bed. You're going to go back to school, and we're going to figure out what comes next, together." But I can't," Lily protested weakly, even as hope bloomed in her chest. "You don't know me. I could steal from you. I could lie to you. You could," Maxwell agreed, his tone matter of fact. "But you won't, because you're not that kind of person. You're the kind of person who feeds a stranger's dog out of compassion, who shows kindness to an animal even when you're hungry yourself. That tells me everything I need to know about your character, your values, your heart." Lily's eyes filled with tears, and this time she didn't try to hold them back. They spilled down her cheeks, and her shoulders trembled with the force of emotion she'd been holding in for so long. She looked down at her plate, unable to meet his gaze. No one's ever done anything like this for me before. No one's ever believed in me like that." Maxwell reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. Then it's about time someone did. That night, Maxwell showed Lily to one of the guest rooms, a beautiful space with a four-poster bed draped in soft linens, an ornate wardrobe, and windows that overlooked the gardens with their carefully manicured lawns and fountain. The room was decorated in soft blues and creams, with artwork on the walls and fresh flowers in a vase on the dresser. It was the kind of room that belonged in a magazine, the kind of room that most people only dreamed about. She stood in the doorway, afraid to enter, afraid to believe that this was real, that she wasn't dreaming, that this wasn't some elaborate trick that would end with her being thrown out on the street. "The bathroom is through there," Maxwell said, pointing to a door on the far side of the room. "There are clean clothes in the closet and toiletries in the bathroom. Whatever you need, get some rest. We'll talk more in the morning." Lily nodded slowly, still seeming unable to believe this was happening. She stepped into the room, as if walking on eggshells, as if the floor might give way beneath her. She ran her hand gently over the soft fabric of the bedspread, marveling at its texture. As Maxwell turned to leave, she called out softly, her voice small and uncertain, "Mr. Harrington?" "Maxwell," he corrected gently, pausing in the doorway. "Just Maxwell. We're going to be seeing a lot of each other. No need for formality." "Maxwell," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "Thank you. For everything. For believing in me. For caring." He smiled, and it was a real smile, not the practiced expression he usually wore for business associates and board members. It was genuine, warm, filled with something he'd thought was dead inside him. "You're welcome, Lily. Get some sleep. You're safe now. I promise you that." As he closed the door behind him, Maxwell leaned against the wall in the hallway, overwhelmed by the weight of what he'd just done. He'd taken a homeless child into his home. His lawyers would have a fit. His security team would demand explanations. His board would question his mental state. But for the first time in years, Maxwell didn't care about any of that. He cared about Lily, and that terrified him more than anything else ever had. Because caring meant vulnerability. Caring meant risk. Caring meant that he had something to lose. But as he stood there in the quiet hallway, listening to the faint sounds of Lily moving around in the guest room, he realized that he'd already lost something far more valuable than money or power or status. He'd lost his loneliness. And in exchange, he'd found something he didn't even know he was searching for: purpose. The morning sun filtered through the mansion's floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long golden rays across the polished hardwood floors. Maxwell woke early, as he always did, his body conditioned by decades of discipline to rise before dawn. But this morning was different. This morning, he found himself thinking about Lily before his feet even touched the ground. He made his way downstairs to the kitchen, moving quietly through the silent corridors. The house felt different somehow. Warmer, less empty, as if a single person's presence could transform an entire space. He began preparing breakfast, something he rarely did anymore. Fresh fruit, pastries from the bakery downstairs in the lobby of his office building. He'd had his assistant send them over early. Eggs, toast, fresh squeezed orange juice. He was arranging everything on the counter when he heard footsteps on the marble stairs. Lily appeared, hesitantly, wearing clothes from the closet that were still too large, but infinitely better than what she'd been wearing. Her hair was wet, she'd showered, and her face was clean. Without the dirt and grime, she looked even younger, more vulnerable, but also somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Good morning." Maxwell said warmly, watching as her eyes widened at the spread of food he'd prepared. I thought you might be hungry. Lily approached the counter slowly, as if afraid the food might disappear if she moved too quickly. You did all this? For me? Of course, Maxwell said simply. You need to eat. Proper meals, multiple times a day. Your body needs to recover from the malnutrition. They ate together in comfortable silence, and Maxwell found himself studying Lily across the table. In the morning light, he could see details he'd missed the night before. The intelligence in her eyes, the strength in her jaw despite her thin face, the way she held herself with a dignity that circumstances hadn't been able to strip away. I need to make some phone calls today, Maxwell said carefully, setting down his coffee cup. Important ones. About you. Lily's entire body went rigid. What kind of phone calls? To a lawyer, Maxwell said, meeting her eyes directly. And to the state. We need to address your legal situation. You're a minor without guardianship. There are procedures we need to follow. Fear flashed across Lily's face. Are you turning me in? Are you going to send me back to... No, Maxwell said firmly, reaching across the table to take her hand. I'm not sending you anywhere. But we need to do this the right way. Legally. I want to become your guardian, Lily. I want to make sure you're protected, that you have every opportunity to build a good life. But that requires going through the proper channels. Lily's eyes filled with tears. You want to be my guardian? Like I'd be your responsibility? You already are, Maxwell said quietly. But yes, I want to make it official. I want you to have my name, my protection, my resources. I want you to have a future. The phone calls that followed were complicated. Maxwell's lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, arrived at the mansion within the hour. She reviewed Lily's situation with practiced efficiency, her expression growing darker as she listened to the details. The foster care situation is concerning, Patricia said, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. If we can document the abuse, we might be able to press charges against the foster parent. That could help our case for guardianship. Lily looked terrified at the mention of charges. I don't want to go to court. I don't want to testify or... We'll figure it out, Maxwell said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. But Patricia is right. We need to document what happened to protect you, to ensure it doesn't happen to another child. Patricia worked through the afternoon, making calls to social services, pulling records, building a case. By evening, she had a preliminary plan. The good news, Patricia said, reviewing her notes, is that Mr. Harrington's financial stability and clean background make him an ideal guardian candidate. The state will likely approve the guardianship petition, especially given the circumstances of Lily's current situation. The foster care system is overwhelmed, and they're always looking for stable placements for vulnerable children. And the bad news? Maxwell asked, though he could guess. There will be home visits. Social services will want to ensure that Lily is being properly cared for. They'll also likely recommend counseling, trauma counseling specifically. What Lily has experienced is significant, and she'll need professional help processing it. Maxwell looked at Lily, who had gone very quiet. Is that okay with you? Counseling? Lily nodded slowly. If it helps me not have nightmares anymore, then yes, I want to try. Over the following weeks, the machinery of the legal system moved forward. Social workers visited the mansion, toured Lily's room, interviewed her about her living situation. Each visit made Lily anxious, but Maxwell was always there, calm and reassuring, making it clear that he was her advocate, her protector. The guardianship was approved on a Tuesday afternoon. Patricia called with the news, and Maxwell felt a weight lift from his chest that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "It's official," Patricia said. "Lily is your ward. Congratulations, Mr. Harrington." Maxwell looked at Lily, who was sitting on the couch with Rex's head in her lap. She was reading a novel he'd brought home for her, something about a girl finding her place in the world. When she looked up and saw his expression, she understood immediately. "We did it?" she asked, hope blooming in her voice. "We did it," Maxwell confirmed. "You're officially part of this family now, Lily. This is your home. I'm your guardian. You're safe." Lily's face crumpled, and she buried her face in Rex's fur, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Not sad sobs, but the kind of overwhelming emotional release that comes from finally feeling safe after a long time of danger. But even as Maxwell celebrated this victory, he was beginning to understand the true weight of his new responsibility. Lily needed more than just a safe home and regular meals. She needed stability, structure, guidance. She needed someone to help her navigate the trauma of her past and build a future. She needed a father figure, and Maxwell had no experience in that role. He began researching parenting books, reading articles about trauma-informed care, learning about the specific needs of foster children. He attended the first counseling session with Lily, sitting in the waiting room while she worked with a therapist named Dr. Morrison, a kind-faced woman with gentle eyes. When Lily emerged after an hour, she looked emotionally drained, but also somehow lighter. "How was it?" Maxwell asked as they walked to the car. "Hard," Lily admitted. "Dr. Morrison asked me a lot of questions about my mom, about the foster home, about what I experienced. But she also said something that helped. She said that what happened to me wasn't my fault, that I didn't do anything to deserve it. I know that logically, but hearing it from someone else, it made it feel more real somehow." Maxwell reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're going to get through this, Lily. We both are." "How do you know?" Lily asked, looking at him with those intelligent, searching eyes. "Because you're stronger than you know," Maxwell said. "And because I'm not going to let you face this alone." That evening, as Maxwell sat in his study reviewing business documents, he found his mind wandering. He'd built an empire, accumulated wealth beyond measure, achieved every professional goal he'd set for himself. But none of it had filled the emptiness inside him. Now, with Lily in his life, that emptiness was beginning to fill. Not completely, he still had his own demons to face, his own issues to work through. But it was a start. He thought about the man he'd been just weeks ago. Cold, distant, disconnected from anything resembling genuine human connection. He thought about how close he'd come to never meeting Lily, to never knowing what it felt like to care about someone more than he cared about himself. There was a soft knock on the study door. "Come in," Maxwell called. Lily entered, holding a piece of paper. She looked nervous. "I wrote something for my counseling session next week. I wanted to show it to you first." Maxwell gestured for her to sit, and Lily perched on the edge of the leather chair across from his desk. She unfolded the paper with trembling hands. "It's about my mom," Lily said quietly. "Dr. Morrison asked me to write a letter to her. I don't have to send it or anything. It's just to help me process my feelings." Maxwell nodded encouragingly. "Would you like to read it to me?" Lily took a deep breath and began to read. Her letter was heartbreaking and beautiful, filled with love for her mother, anger at her addiction, grief over her death, and ultimately, forgiveness and acceptance. By the time she finished, both of them had tears streaming down their faces. "That was beautiful, Lily," Maxwell said softly. "Your mother would be proud of you." "Do you think so?" Lily asked, her voice small and uncertain. "I know so," Maxwell said. "You've survived things that would have broken most people. You've kept your kindness and your compassion intact despite everything you've endured. That's not weakness, Lily. That's strength. That's character. That's who you are." Lily nodded, wiping her eyes. She folded the letter carefully and stood to leave. At the door, she paused. "Maxwell?" "Yes. Thank you. For believing in me. For making me feel like I matter." Maxwell felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You matter, Lily. You matter more than you know." After she left, Maxwell sat alone in his study, staring out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. His life had changed in ways he never could have anticipated. The empire he'd spent so long building suddenly seemed less important than the life he was building with Lily. He pulled out his phone and called Patricia. "I need you to draw up some legal documents," he said when she answered. "I want to revise my will. I want to make sure that if anything happens to me, Lily is taken care of. I want to set up a trust fund for her education, her future. I want to make sure she has every opportunity." "Of course," Patricia said. "I'll get started on it right away." As Maxwell ended the call, he realized something profound. He was no longer just living for himself. He had someone who depended on him. Someone he cared about more than anything else. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. That night, as he walked through the hallway toward his bedroom, he paused outside Lily's room. He could see the soft glow of her bedside lamp under the door. He hoped she was reading, finding comfort in stories, finding escape in worlds beyond her own. He knocked softly. "Lily, you still awake?" "Yeah," she called out. "Come in." Maxwell opened the door to find Lily sitting up in bed, the novel he'd given her open on her lap. She looked so small in the large bed, so young, but also so much more at peace than she had been just weeks ago. "I wanted to check on you," Maxwell said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Make sure you're settling in okay." "I am," Lily said, setting down her book. "This is the nicest place I've ever lived, Maxwell. The nicest place I've ever been. I still can't believe it's real sometimes." "It's real," Maxwell assured her. "And it's yours? This is your home now, Lily, for as long as you want it to be." Lily reached out and took his hand. "I'm glad you found me that night. I'm glad I fed Rex." Maxwell smiled. "So am I, Lily. So am I." As he left her room and made his way to his own bedroom, Maxwell felt something he hadn't felt in years. Contentment. Not the hollow satisfaction of a successful business deal, but genuine, deep contentment that came from knowing he was making a real difference in someone's life. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Lily still had trauma to process, healing to do. Maxwell still had to learn how to be a guardian, how to be a father figure, how to balance his business responsibilities with his new personal ones. But for the first time in his life, Maxwell Harrington felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 3 months into Lily's new life at the mansion, Maxwell found himself in uncharted territory. The guardianship was secure, the legal matters had been resolved, and Lily was thriving in ways that exceeded even his optimistic expectations. She'd enrolled in school, a private institution that specialized in working with students who had experienced trauma. Her grades were exceptional. Her teachers reported that she was engaged and thoughtful in class discussions. But beneath the surface of this newfound stability, Maxwell was beginning to sense something shifting, something unspoken that Lily was struggling with. It started small. A hesitation in her voice when she talked about certain things, a faraway look in her eyes during dinner. The way she sometimes flinched when Maxwell moved too quickly or touched her unexpectedly. Dr. Morrison, her therapist, had warned him about this. Trauma doesn't disappear, she'd explained during one of their joint sessions. It transforms. As Lily feels safer, she may start to process deeper layers of what she's experienced. There might be setbacks. There might be difficult moments. Maxwell had nodded, understanding intellectually, but nothing could have truly prepared him for the reality of witnessing someone he cared about struggle with the aftermath of abuse. It was a Saturday morning when everything came to a head. Maxwell was in his study, reviewing quarterly reports for his company, when he heard a crash from upstairs, followed by Lily's cry. He was out of his chair and up the stairs in seconds, his heart pounding with alarm. He found her in her room, standing frozen in the middle of the floor. A vase, an expensive piece of Murano glass that had sat on her dresser, lay shattered on the hardwood floor. But it wasn't the broken vase that concerned Maxwell. It was Lily's face, pale, eyes wide with panic, her entire body trembling. "Lily?" Maxwell said carefully, keeping his voice calm and gentle. "Are you okay? Did you get hurt?" Lily's eyes focused on him, and he saw the moment recognition returned. Her face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to break it. I was reaching for something, and I knocked it over, and I—" "Hey, it's okay," Maxwell said, moving slowly into the room, giving her space, not wanting to startle her further. "The vase doesn't matter. Are you hurt?" Lily looked down at her hands, as if seeing them for the first time. "No, I don't think so." "Then it's fine," Maxwell said. "Vases can be replaced. You can't. Come on, let's sit down." He guided her to the window seat, and she sank onto it, her entire body shaking. Maxwell sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance, letting her set the pace for any physical contact. "Do you want to talk about what just happened?" Maxwell asked after several minutes of silence. Lily was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "It reminded me of something. When I was in the foster home, Mr. Henderson had this vase. It was his mother's," he said. "Very expensive, very fragile. One day I accidentally knocked it over while I was cleaning. It broke, and he—" She trailed off, her hands clenching into fists. Maxwell waited, sensing that she needed to tell this story, that holding it in was causing her more pain than speaking it would. "He said I had to pay for it," Lily continued, her voice shaking. "He said I owed him, and when I couldn't pay, when I didn't have any money, he said there were other ways I could work off the debt. That's when things got worse." Maxwell felt rage rise in his chest, hot and fierce and all-consuming. He wanted to find this man, wanted to make him pay for what he'd done to this innocent child. But he forced himself to breathe, forced himself to remain calm, because Lily needed him to be steady right now, not consumed by his own anger. "That wasn't your fault," Maxwell said quietly but firmly. "What he did, that was abuse. That was a crime. You didn't deserve that, Lily. You didn't deserve any of it." "I know that in my head," Lily said, tears streaming down her face. "But my body doesn't believe it. Every time something reminds me of that time, I feel like I'm back there, like I'm trapped, like it's happening all over again." Maxwell reached over and gently took her hand. "That's called a trigger. It's a normal response to trauma. Dr. Morrison can help, You work through this. We can help you work through this. But you have to talk to us. You have to let us know when you're struggling. I don't want to be broken, Lily whispered. I don't want to be damaged. I want to just move forward and forget. You're not broken, Maxwell said firmly. And you don't have to forget. Healing isn't about forgetting, Lily. It's about integrating what happened into your story without letting it define you. It's about taking your power back. That afternoon, Maxwell called Dr. Morrison and arranged an emergency session. Lily went, and when she came back, she seemed slightly more at peace, though still fragile. Over the following weeks, Dr. Morrison worked with Lily on processing her trauma more deeply. Maxwell attended several sessions with her, learning techniques to help her when she was triggered, ways to ground her in the present moment when her mind was trapped in the past. But it was during one particularly difficult evening that Maxwell realized the depth of Lily's struggle. He found her in the kitchen at 2 a.m, standing in front of the open refrigerator, staring blankly at the contents. Lily, Maxwell said gently, turning on the soft light over the kitchen island. What are you doing up? I couldn't sleep, Lily said, closing the refrigerator. I had a nightmare. I was back there and I couldn't get away. Maxwell's heart ached for her. Come here. Let's make some warm milk. That might help. As they sat at the kitchen counter with their mugs of warm milk, Maxwell asked carefully, Do you want to talk about the nightmare? Lily wrapped her hands around the mug, seeking its warmth. In the nightmare, I was back in that house. But you were there too. And he was hurting you because of me. Because I brought you there. And I couldn't stop him. I couldn't save you. Maxwell reached over and gently placed his hand over hers. Listen to me, Lily. Nothing he could do would be your fault. You didn't bring me into this situation. You didn't ask for any of what happened to you. And you don't have to save me or protect me. That's my job. My job is to protect you. But what if I'm too much trouble? Lily asked, her voice small and frightened. What if one day you decide that I'm too damaged, too broken, and you send me away? What if I'm not worth... Stop, Maxwell said, his voice gentle but firm. You are worth everything, Lily. You are worth my time, my resources, my energy, my love. You could never be too much trouble. You are my family now. And family doesn't give up on each other when things get hard. Lily's eyes filled with tears. Promise? I promise, Maxwell said. On my life, Lily. I promise. As weeks turned into months, Maxwell began to understand the true complexity of guardianship. It wasn't just about providing food and shelter and education. It was about showing up day after day. For someone who was learning to trust again, who was processing deep trauma, who was trying to rebuild a sense of self that had been shattered. There were good days and bad days. Days when Lily seemed almost carefree, laughing at jokes, excited about school, making plans for the future. And days when she retreated into herself, when the weight of her past seemed too heavy to bear. Maxwell learned to recognize the signs, learned when to push gently, and when to simply be present without demanding anything from her. He learned that healing wasn't linear, that progress wasn't always visible, that sometimes the most important thing he could do was simply sit with her in her pain without trying to fix it. One evening, about 6 months after Lily had come to live with him, Maxwell found her in the library, surrounded by college brochures and applications. What's all this? He asked, settling into the chair across from her. I've been thinking about my future, Lily said, looking up from the materials. Dr. Morrison asked me what I wanted to do with my life. and I realized I didn't have an answer, so I've been researching. I think I want to work with kids who've experienced trauma. I think I want to help people like me. Maxwell felt pride swell in his chest. That's a wonderful goal, Lily. You'd be amazing at that. I was thinking about studying psychology, Lily continued, or social work. Something where I could make a real difference. Something where my experiences could actually mean something. Your experiences already mean something, Maxwell said. They've made you who you are, a compassionate, intelligent, resilient young woman. And yes, I think channeling that into a career helping others is a beautiful idea. Lily smiled, and it was a real smile, genuine and warm. I have you to thank for that, you know. If you hadn't found me that night, if you hadn't believed in me, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have any of this. I think we both found each other at exactly the right time, Maxwell said. You needed someone to believe in you, and I needed someone to remind me what it means to care about something beyond myself. We saved each other, Lily. Later that evening, as Maxwell sat in his study, he reflected on how much his life had changed. His business was still successful, perhaps even more so, as he'd learned to delegate more effectively and focus on the aspects of his work that truly mattered. But his priorities had shifted fundamentally. The empire he'd spent so long building no longer felt like his greatest achievement. His greatest achievement was the young woman sleeping upstairs, the one who was learning to heal, learning to dream, learning to believe in herself. He pulled out his phone and called Patricia. I need to update my will again, he said. I want to make sure that if anything happens to me, Lily is completely provided for. I want to set up educational trusts, living expenses, everything she could possibly need. Of course, Patricia said. I'll draw up the documents. As Maxwell ended the call, realized something profound. He had found his purpose, not in boardrooms or business deals, but in the simple act of showing up for someone, of believing in them when they couldn't believe in themselves, of offering unconditional love and support. The road ahead would still be challenging. Lily would continue to process her trauma, to work through difficult emotions, to rebuild her sense of self. But she wouldn't have to do it alone. And Maxwell would continue to learn what it meant to be a father, to be a guardian, to be the kind of person who could make a real difference in someone's life. In the quiet of his study, with the city lights twinkling outside his window, Maxwell Harrington, billionaire, empire builder, man who had once thought he had everything, realized that he finally did. He had everything that mattered.